Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our panel discussion, Identifying Risk, Managing Trauma, and Assessing Your Legal Rights During this Pandemic. I'm so excited to be hosting today's panel. My name is Jennifer Long. I'm the CEO and a co-founder of AEquitas, and I will be introducing today's monitors and just walking you through a little bit of the features of the Zoom in case some of you are not familiar with it. Today's panelists will be offering their insights into how to overcome trauma and support survivors, and we encourage you to participate by posing questions. If you have a question during the presentation, please enter it in the Q&A box. It's on the bottom of your screen, or the chat box. And if you're directing it at a specific panelist, please note that when writing your question. I'll be reviewing them and I'll be posing them to the panelists at the end of the panel presentation, and we'll try and shoot for around 2:30 for that. Our plan is to get all of your questions in, time permitting, but of course we're going to include their contact information so that you can reach out to them, even whether or not you pose your question today. Really so humbled to have today's panel benefit AEquitas. And I want to tell you just a little bit about it. AEquitas's mission is to improve the quality of justice in sexual violence, partner violence, stalking, exploitation, and human trafficking cases by developing, evaluating, and refining prosecution practices that increase victim safety and offender accountability. AEquitas achieves justice for survivors by assessing and strengthening the prosecutor's approach to sexual and gender-based violence and human trafficking cases, and our actions serve as a catalyst for change in agency, office, and case practices, as well as their policies. Our vision at AEquitas is to create a system where all survivors are heard, cases are valued and adjudicated fairly. AEquitas has become a synonym for justice. In fact, AEquitas is the name of the Roman goddess for justice and equity. And we are a standing leader in the development of prosecution practices that promote dignity, rights, and general well-being of victims and the community. We feel like we're a leader in the field due to our continuous learning, unparalleled experience, and commitment to action. We do this by identifying applicable laws, practices, and policies. We analyze them through the lens of multidisciplinary research. We translate that research into strategies that empower victims, uphold due process, and positively impact the community. And we put these strategies into action in the field with amazing frontline prosecutors, law enforcement, healthcare, advocates, and others whose mission is to achieve justice as well. If you'd like to learn more about AEquitas, please visit our website. You can also find ways to follow us on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and the links for each are available on our website. As I mentioned in the beginning, we're so grateful to these presenters, and so it's very humbling to have this amazing panel benefit AEquitas. And if you are able, or if you would like to make a donation, it's certainly not required. They can be made from Sunday at midnight. Today is Mother's Day. And if you wish, you can, we're encouraging people to make them in honor of mothers or other people special to them. So very, again, excited to introduce to you our panelists today, Shari Botwin, Lisa Kane Brown, and Kristen Gibbons Feden. Shari Botwin opened her Cherry Hill private practice in 1996. Prior to starting her own practice, she worked at Renfrew Center in Philadelphia. She provides individual, group, and family therapy with specialization in treating trauma, abuse, eating disorders, anxiety, and depression. She conducts workshops and presents keynote addresses throughout the country. She's a featured freelance writer in numerous national outlets and has provided op-eds and expert commentary around trauma to news outlets throughout the country. Shari's second book, Thriving After Trauma, Stories of Living and Healing, was published by Rowman and Littlefield and was released worldwide, hardcover, audio, and ebook on November 4th, 2019. Today, Shari is generously donating $5 of the proceeds from the sale of her signed book purchased following this webinar. And we'll include details of how to purchase this book at the end of this webinar. Lisa Kane Brown concentrates on family law practice in the areas of divorce, custody, and support. She also regularly appointed by the court to act as a guardian ad litem on behalf of children in custody cases. She's co-chair of the Children in Law Committee of the Montgomery Bar Association. She's the past co-chair of the Child Advocates Committee and current chair of the Domestic Violence Subcommittee of the Family Law section of the Montgomery Bar Association. Lisa is a longtime dedicated volunteer with the Montgomery Child Advocacy Project, which provides free legal representation to children in Montgomery County who are victims of crime, abuse, and neglect. In addition, she's court appointed to represent unaccompanied refugee minors who are resettled in the United States and placed in foster care in Pennsylvania. And finally, Kristen Gibbons Feden, christened by the New York Times as the prosecutor who stared down Bill Cosby, is widely regarded as one of the nation's leading litigators in the field of sexual abuse. She's proven herself to be a fearless litigator when fighting survivors against high-profile offenders and large institutions. Kristen is internationally recognized as a leading litigator handling sexual violence cases. Nationally acclaimed as a fierce litigator, she has represented numerous sexual abuse survivors in their pursuit of civil justice and received a multitude of awards for her tireless work with the most vulnerable survivors, many of whom were in their darkest moments when they sought her out. I'm also very proud to call Kristen an AEquitas board member. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to our presenters. As I figure out how to stop sharing the screen, maybe I will turn it over to Shari.
It's so exciting to be here and be able to talk among so many amazing women. I just wanted to start by talking about the importance of taking care of ourselves through this entire situation. When I was thinking about preparing for today, one of the things I was thinking was how brave it is even to just show up today, to be able to acknowledge this is something that I want to attend, especially if you are a survivor of any type of trauma, sexual assault, sexual abuse. So I really want to start by saying it's brave to be here today and to be open to talking about things, topics that may be triggering or reminding you of things that you've been through. So one of the other things I was thinking about was how can we best take care of ourselves as we go through this webinar. It's something that I think about whenever I'm getting ready to present as a childhood sexual abuse survivor myself. I find it so important to really continue to look at safety and how to make sure that I'm doing what I can be doing to talk about topics that can be so difficult, but still to keep myself grounded and present. So one of the things that I wanted to say to you today was make sure that as we go through the hour, if you start to feel upset or if you start to feel like you don't know what to do with the feelings that you're having, write it down. Make sure that when we get off today, call somebody, journal, talk to your therapist, talk to your partner. So I really want to make sure that I start with that, because I think one of the themes in the work that I do is it's bad enough that we've been through situations where we've been in danger, where we felt stranded and unsafe. The point of doing this webinar is not to recreate or re-trigger those feelings. If anything, we're here to empower each other, and we're here to help each other get through such a difficult time. So I just want to make sure that I say that. And I also just want to say, when we went to plan this today, we wanted to make sure that survivors and supporters and loved ones could be a part of this. So we all are connected, even if our stories are very different. And even though we're not going to be sharing our specific stories about what happened to us as we go through the hour, this is an opportunity to think about, what are some of the things that I share in common with other people? What are some strategies that I'm going to talk about, or that Lisa or Kristen will talk about? What are some strategies that I can use to get through this such difficult time? So if you keep that in mind as we go through the hour, I think you're going to walk away from this not feeling triggered, but feeling less alone and feeling more hopeful about your life moving forward. I know one of the most difficult things about the pandemic is that in a way, it makes us have to stop the lives that we were living before. And if you're someone that's in the midst of recovery, if you're someone that just reported an assault before the lockdown, if you're somebody that went to therapy because of something that happened to you 20 years ago, no matter where we are in this process, in a way, by being told we need to stay in our homes, by being told we can't go see our friends or we can't sit in our therapist's office, it feels so constraining. But what I want to say is that while we have to deal with those limitations, there are things that we can do to stay connected. There's things that we can do to remind ourselves that we may feel stuck right now, but this is temporary. This is not going to be the rest of our lives. And we are not going to let this pandemic or the restrictions placed on us make us feel held hostage once again. That's one of the things I think that I struggled with in the beginning when we were first told that as therapists, we can't go to our offices, or thinking about stuff that I deal with in my own recovery, or thinking about friends that I know or colleagues that I know. It was such a frustrating experience to have to think about, how can I not see people? How can I not look people in the eye? And I know that one of the things that a lot of sexual assault and abuse survivors struggle with is feelings about trust. How do I trust somebody? How do I look at somebody's body language if I can't sit in the room with them? So one of the things that I've really been working on with people is, now more than ever, we really need to be able to use our words to describe what we're feeling, to ask for what we need. So if you're trying to connect with somebody, or if you're really struggling with the isolation, if you're feeling like being in your home reminds you of being held hostage, or it reminds you of living with a parent that was abusing you, or it reminds you of living with a partner that mistreats you, what you want to do is you want to say to yourself that these are reminders, but what is the difference? What's happening in my life today that's different? So one of the things that I do is I try to talk with patients about creating safe spaces in the home that we're living in. And that could be anywhere. That could be your bedroom. That could be your backyard. That could include people that you live with, or it can include people that you can't see. But just trying to picture all of these people around you, and to know that even if you can't sit in the room with them, or if you can sit in the room with some of them because you're living with some of them, make sure you let them know when you're really just feeling like, I can't do this anymore. I can't be sitting here anymore. I need to go and do the things I was doing before. I know one of the hardest things is that when I'm having a session with somebody and they're starting to feel triggered, or they're starting to have flashbacks, and I can feel the shame, I can see their pain. I find it so difficult to not be able to just have that in-person contact, that face-to-face contact. So I try to really just use my words. At times I will work with people to just try and look at the person that you're in the room with. Because one of the things I think also as trauma survivors that we struggle with is all these feelings of shame, all these feelings of, well, I feel embarrassed, or I don't really want people to look at me. But to be able to take this opportunity while we're in the quarantine to try and really work past the shame, to try and make eye contact, so that when you look into your husband's eyes, or your therapist, or your friends, or even your kid, you can see in their eyes that these are people that love me, accept me, and hear me, and know who I am. And I think that was one of the other things I was thinking about. If you're living with somebody, or you're not living with somebody, if you're living alone and you're longing for that, you're longing to feel like, I need to sit in the room with somebody that understands, coming onto a webinar like this, or seeking online support groups, trying to find books, again, not books that are going to talk about specifics about sexual assault, but to talk about the feelings, the struggles. Now's the time to really get out there and grab a hold of any resources that you can, to remind yourself that that you're not alone. I know one of the other things, and I've been talking to people about this as well. What if you're somebody that just reported your assault? Or what if you're somebody that's in the middle of litigation and now you can't move forward because we can't even leave our house? What I would say to you is you're going to feel a lot of stuff about that. You're going to get really mad. You're going to feel frustrated. But just know these are normal feelings. What I try to remind myself and everybody else around me is that when we start to feel overloaded or overwhelmed or even flooded, which is when we feel all different feelings at once and we don't know what to do, that's when we want to take those coping strategies that we've been working on even before all this, and we really want to get that bag out and start really utilizing those supports, whether it's calling a friend, taking a walk, going to a yoga class online, doing something, using your pets as support to really just try and remind yourself that these are feelings that you're having, and you're going to have really strong feelings. And at times, I know many people who've been assaulted struggle with self-harm and wanting to be self-destructive. I never want that for people. The last thing I would want is for you to feel like you should hurt yourself, especially all that's been done to you. So these are outlets. We need to work on having outlets. And I think, again, for some of us who used to go take classes at the gym or who used to go to support groups, or even just sometimes, I know for myself, sometimes even just going to work is a place where I feel safe and I feel grounded. And I was just saying to these women before, I haven't sat in my office in almost 8 weeks, and I really miss that. So when I feel like I need to do something that makes me feel connected to my life today, and I need to think about the things in my life that make me safe, I need to think about my life moving forward, that while this is an incredibly frustrating and stressful time and things may not be the same for a while, that doesn't mean that we're not going to feel safe, or that you're not going to be able to talk with your attorney or get back into that courtroom or go back and see your therapist. It feels like it's never going to end. And I think anybody who's lived through trauma knows what that feels like, that feeling of unknown and not knowing what day, what time is this going to end. That's also very stressful. But what I would say to you is it's the unknown. And the best thing that we can do when we're in that spot is we can say to ourselves, well, what are some things I do know? What are some things I know about my life today that I have control over? And we try to really just focus on those things. So I think, again, what I would say to all of you that are here, whether you're a survivor or you're here for loved ones or you're an advocate, just showing up today, you really want to acknowledge the importance of that. And hopefully when we sign off at the end of the hour, you'll walk away feeling like, I know it's not me. I know that people believe me. I know there are things I can do even when I can't leave my house. That's my hope. And I'm really very excited to hear what the other women are going to be sharing with us. And I'm excited to hear what your questions are. And I just want to thank you again so much for coming today and being a part of this. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Shari. Lisa?
Hi, I'm Lisa Kane Brown, and I'm going to talk a little bit today about child abuse during this pandemic. There's been a lot of things I've seen in the media about concerns regarding kids that are home now, at-risk kids that are home with families where their abuser is living in the same household. And, families that are already under a tremendous amount of strain that a lot of times leads to abuse have additional strains now because they're worrying about finances, they're worrying about jobs, they're worrying about health. They're having to be teachers for kids that are doing schooling at home. And all of these high stress circumstances can lead to a surge in child abuse. And what we already know, specifically here in Pennsylvania, is that our abuse reports to the Childline Abuse Hotline, which is staffed 24/7, have dropped by approximately half. And as an advocate, that literally keeps me awake at night, because there are unknown kids out there who are home right now with people who are hurting them. And so we have to think about what are the options that we have, which I'm going to get to in a minute. These are the same kids that are also at tremendous risk for sexual violence. And we know that 1 in 4 girls is sexually abused before the age of 18. And we also know that the majority of the time it's by a caregiver or family member or close family acquaintance. The opportunities for kids to seek refuge outside of these abusive environments aren't there right now. Everything's closed. Schools are closed. No Little League, no Girl Scouts. We're already hearing that pools in the summer are going to be closed. Camps are closed. So they're not under the watchful eye of teachers and any of these other professionals that would be able to spot what they think might be signs of abuse and make a report. Even pediatricians are having to see kids now virtually. I liken it to summertime when kids aren't in school, except we now have that extra added layer that all of those summertime activities aren't taking place. So this is really unprecedented in the area of child abuse. So we have these kids that are out there. It's obviously very concerning. And what I expect and what I've read so far is that when all of this comes to an end, whatever that's supposed to look like, and these kids are out in circulation again, so to speak, we're going to see a huge surge in cases because they're going to be back in front of those people that can have eyes on them. There are social workers who are having to do virtual visits. They can still do emergency visits in a home if they have to. But in order for that to be triggered for a kid who's never been in the system before, there has to be a report made. And that goes right back to the people that normally make the reports aren't seeing these kids. So what can we do, right? We're all sitting here. I know as an advocate, like I said before, it keeps me up at night. Well, in your community, if you're concerned about a specific family, you can, and I'm talking about a family that's just under a lot of strain that can lead to short fuses, short tempers, and somebody loses it and something goes wrong. Check in. If you feel like someone is having issues being able to feed their family, maybe put together a donation box. Enlist as many community leaders as you can, pastors, coaches that aren't coaching right now, anyone who you think could be helpful as a support system. We don't have to rely on our individual community because everything else that we would normally rely on isn't available to us. So in order to at least somehow get eyes on kids, you have to be creative, you have to be innovative, and you have to try to do it in a way that is appropriate and non-confrontational, because the goal is to get your eyes on that child, not to sort of get in someone's face. I always like to say, use Jedi mind tricks whenever possible. And if you think something's wrong, absolutely call the hotline, which we're going to put that in the materials, but the phone number in Pennsylvania is 1-800-932-0313. That's the child line hotline, and it's staffed 24/7. This is a community problem. It always has been. It's just that I feel like most of the time in communities, in homes, in neighborhoods, people don't get involved. People don't want to speak up. People are afraid to get involved with other people's families. They're not going to say anything. And, the school will do that. Kids go to school, so somebody will see and make sure and make a call. No, those days are past. It's time for us to step up. And if you think something's wrong, pick up the phone. Even if it's just to pick up the phone and call that parent and say, hey, how you guys doing? Just checking in. You can also do FaceTime. Be that consistent, trusted person that at least that child can see, so that they're not home feeling isolated and alone and being hurt. We have the tools to make kids safe. It's just, we have this technology, we just don't need to use it typically. And we certainly don't need to use it the way that it's necessary to be used right now. And like I said before, social workers are already doing virtual visits. You could organize a neighborhood arts and craft, a neighborhood, reading circle, and just do it via Zoom or FaceTime. And while you're out and about, even if you're just outside social distancing or doing any of these virtual contacts, make sure that you're looking for any signs of distress, and just, again, be that consistent, trusted adult that's available for that child. Just because you aren't physically present doesn't mean you can't help. And I know a lot of us are struggling with that right now. Like I said, it just keeps me up at night thinking about all of these kids that are out there. But even if you don't know for sure, or if you're just kind of on the fence and I don't know, I had some concerns about that family before and they're not outside anymore and I haven't seen these kids and it's really bothering me, err on the side of caution. Pick up the phone and make the call, because it's anonymous. No one's going to know that you did. And again, just make sure that you are doing everything that you feel you can to try to get eyes on kids whenever possible. Because until this is all over, we have to rely on each other.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And I think it's so great that we've gone from, just this holistic response of therapeutic, and then Lisa from both the family law perspective and the child advocacy perspective. And now Kristen coming in from the prosecution perspective, as well as the, attorney representing survivors, can really give this holistic view of how to identify risks and how to protect and promote and support survivors. So Kristen?
Thank you. And thank you everyone who is willing to come and kind of hear our webinar. We're hoping that everyone gets something out of this, and we're hoping that we can help people either by providing them with legal information or information of how they can appropriately deal with any trauma they are experiencing, or if any of their loved ones, friends, or like Lisa pointed out, children within the neighborhood are experiencing ones. We just want to equip you with, some armor, some virtual armor, if you will, to kind of take into the world during this pandemic. I wanted to kind of throw out, just as Lisa kind of threw out those horrific statistics regarding, child line reports going down. And we know generally that when we're talking about statistics of reports, call-ins, all these types of crimes regarding domestic violence, child abuse, and sexual violence, those are generally underreported as well. But I'm actually seeing from my research a difference as it comes to adult domestic violence or intimate partner violence, as well as sexual violence. The numbers are staggering throughout the whole entire world. Just looking at from an international basis, pointing out some, like Australia's, their government reported there was a 75% increase in online searches for support for domestic violence during this pandemic. And South Africa reported there was almost 90,000 reports of gender-based violence in just the first week of lockdown. So we're seeing that internationally, this pandemic, this isolation, these stay-at-home orders are really hitting families very hard. It's also attacking us on a national basis. Many states are reporting there is a high increase in calls just within the first weekend of this pandemic. Specifically in Minnesota, there was a 25% increase in reported cases. And these are specifically dealing with domestic violence or intimate partner violence and sexual violence type crimes. In DC, for example, the traffic at the city's largest domestic violence crisis intervention agency doubled. Yet, similar to what we are seeing with Lisa, as Lisa quoted in terms of child abuse, there was actually a 43% decrease in SANE examinations, and that's sexual assault nursing examinations, where a person can go to the hospital to try to make sure that they are healthy after being sexually assaulted, but also in attempts to preserve evidence so that their offender can be held accountable. Those are actually being seen to go down just because people are fearful outside of the violence that they are experiencing from contracting COVID, or they have other priorities such as their children, job priorities, job pressures, shelter pressures, bill pressures. So there's a lot of things that are going on in people's lives that are also struggling. In New York City, for example, the Domestic and Sexual Violence Resource website reported a 250% increase in daily traffic on the website just from March 18th of this year to April 4th of this year. So we're not even talking any more than about a 3-week span. And there's also a huge uptick in calls for help, 911, over the last decade. I'm sorry, over the past month, excuse me. CNN actually reported, and I thought this was pretty staggering, that there was 9 metropolitan police departments saw spikes in the double-digit percentages for domestic violence or intimate partner violence cases in March alone. And they even compared that to March of last year, or even the earlier months of this year, which was January and February. So I think I wanted to start off with those staggering statistics because generally gender-based violence, such as domestic violence, intimate partner violence, and sexual violence, these types of crimes are underreported anyway. But this surge makes it very clear that there is a huge problem that is being exacerbated with this pandemic. And our hope with this webinar is to help you kind of see it, identify it, help people who are dealing with this personally, but then also, can people still hear me? Oh, okay. But also be able to assist people who they know are experiencing this. And as Lisa pointed out, there's a lot of obstacles at this time for survivors, and dealing specifically with adults, because Lisa handled it, I think, beautifully and eloquently when it comes to children. You know, not only are schools closed, but workplaces are closed as well. And I think Shari said it beautifully. You know, she goes to work, even though she is a therapist, she goes to work and she is able to unwind. She is able to kind of do what she really enjoys doing. And that is working for survivors. She's not even able to go to her office. And I know she's still doing remotely, which is beautiful. It's amazing that she's still able to help survivors and other clients of hers. But again, that workplace is not only great for people mentally. I love going to work sometimes, but also for survivors of intimate partner violence, because they have that support system there. Not only a support system who can lend an ear or vent, but then again, they also have that network of individuals who can say, hey, what's going on? Why do I see that bruise? What happened? People who are actually looking into them and being able to kind of see them. There's little or no access to their usual networks. And so as Lisa kind of pointed out, reaching out to those individuals would be really, really helpful to them. Some people feel like they're unable because they're trapped in their house and they're isolated. They're unable to make those calls to the hotline because they fear for being overheard by their abuser. Keep in mind, a lot of people are in the home trapped with their abuser. And a lot of times, as Lisa pointed out, these are children trapped in the home with their parents who are also their abusers. And I think also the news, I've had to kind of be mindful of how much news that I watch on a daily basis, just because it is so sad to see all the deaths. But because of what we're seeing on the news, I think that it is reasonable for people to get the false impression that shelters are unavailable, that shelters are full, or even, you know, a lot of times survivors may be even afraid to report anything that is very abusive that they normally may have reported, because they're fearful that their husband or their significant other or whoever is abusing them could go to jail. And what's going on in the jail? Well, we have close proximity places where people are contracting COVID. And so survivors are taking on a lot, just in terms of what they're able to kind of do being in isolation. And equally, the abusers are using these coercive and controlling tactics to even further submit their to survivors. This can take the form of what I've already talked about, but also can take the form of financial abuse, right? You have people losing their jobs, and the abuser could be the sole breadwinner initially, but also specifically now if the survivor has lost their job. So it's really exacerbated. Notwithstanding the fact that if the survivor or significant other that is being abused is an immigrant survivor, a lot of times that makes the immigrant survivor feel particularly vulnerable because they're afraid to get deported. They're afraid that they lack the access to some of the safety net benefits that they could have prior to. I know like early COVID relief bills passed by Congress didn't really ensure that there was access to COVID testing and care that would be universally covered. And so a lot of immigrant survivors felt like they were not covered and they couldn't get tested. Or even the direct cash payments, they weren't sure if it was necessarily applicable to them. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to do this webinar, not only to raise awareness, but to give you the tools and to arm you guys with things that can actually, you can take out into the community, whether via Zoom or some other way, to kind of make sure to help other people. But also with this, you know, funds are being diverted to different places. And so that's why I was really glad that we are doing this fundraiser for AEquitas. And I know Jen kind of already discussed with you guys what AEquitas does. They refine these laws. They work with law enforcement. They work with prosecutors. And I'm about to get into the criminal justice system and how that has been affected through COVID. But these are the agencies that we really need to support, even during these tough times. And I know resources are very limited. People are losing their jobs. But there are a lot of other people that if you even have an extra dollar to support these people, whether by making a donation basket, as Lisa had pointed out, or even being able to support the organizations that are doing this great work, such as AEquitas. You know, every dollar counts, and particularly for this webinar, we actually have matching partners. So if you can only give $1, please do so, because we really need to help reach that goal. But kind of turning to the effect that COVID has had on, you know, survivors' access to the legal system. You know, courts generally, and I think it's also not only an impression that is being given, but courts are still open. There is, though limited, there is access to the courts. But I have to say, as a lawyer and as a victim rights activist, survivors' rights activist, and as a human being, I am disappointed that it's not giving what I think it could, but understanding that this is a crisis and there is additional stress on the court system. But I think it's important to note that there is additional stress on already volatile parenting arrangements with abusive partners. There's a lot of stress left on a lot of survivors who have to leave their children unprotected with abusive parents, and also putting these survivors at risk. The court systems have been disrupted, but like I said, there is access. There is access to the courts, there is access to law enforcement, and there is access to lawyers. Generally, many courts are still hearing emergency protection from abuse or other type of restraining orders. But sadly, most courts are not really hearing all of the custody hearings. And so if you need a motion to modify a custody arrangement, you know, those are being canceled and postponed or even categorized as non-emergency, even though they are quite an emergency to those parents, particularly when there is an abusive parent or the abusive parent, you know, that, you know, certain custody orders or other orders that have been in place are not being enforced. This is also really significantly impacted where there are orders for supervised visitation, and those supervisors are unavailable. Usually they're social workers, those supervision, not only are they unavailable, but those supervision centers are also closed. Usually it's the schools or daycares, and so they're closed. So there are fewer, or in some places, no safe places for supervised visits to take place. And a lot of survivors are still going up against the fact that those abusive parents are still trying to push for visitation. And then Lisa can kind of probably add on to that as well. The other element is that there's a lot of petitions for nonviolent offenders to be released or diverted from jail. And that can also place a lot of stress on survivors as well because of the way different jurisdictions define nonviolence. There's also technological breakdowns. Some victims and survivors do not have access to the technological resources in order to have that virtual court hearing. And so this is very difficult for survivors. I also wanted to mention that we have a lot of campus survivors out there as well who are home, and many of them do not want to disclose to their parents or other people who they may be residing with the violence that they endured while at school. I want to make sure that they all know that those Title IX, their Title IX rights are still to be enforced, but it becomes very difficult for them because if they have to do an interview with the Title IX coordinator over the phone or virtually, they risk being overheard by their families. So our support goes out to them as well. And I want to make sure that we have some time for our questions. So I'm going to kind of wrap up a little bit here, but certainly if anyone has any questions about what I'm saying, please feel free to ask. The civil courts are also still open in terms of motions, but a lot of times it's very difficult to initiate new lawsuits Why is that important? Well, because there's statute of limitations that go with every case. Statute of limitations is essentially the deadline by which a person can file a suit. A deadline by which a person can file a suit against the person who has assaulted them, who is sexually violent, against that institution that enabled that sexual violence to occur. And many states are taking different perspectives on how they are dealing with statute of limitations. For example, some states are tolling or staying these statute of limitations with hard end dates. For example, in Massachusetts and Iowa and New York, they actually give an end date. They say, okay, the statute of limitations will be tolled until this particular date. Other states like Connecticut, Nevada, Maryland, Kansas, and other states are doing more flexible tolling. For example, in Connecticut, they're suspending the statute of limitations until the public emergency is terminated. And that's going to be a legislative decision. Or even in Nevada, where they are suspending it until 30 days after the state of emergency ends. I know in Pennsylvania, they are still accepting writs of summons and then for purposes of statute of limitations, but then there are suspensions for deadlines surrounding process. How are we going to serve an individual or give that complaint to that person initiating that lawsuit when we have to be mindful of social distancing? So, the key takeaway here is, I hate to say this, contact an attorney, just so that you can be mindful of your rights, mindful of what certain entities are supposed to be doing, mindful of whether or not the courts are open, whether or not your court date is still on. You want to make sure that you consult an attorney. You want to consult a knowledgeable attorney in that area of practice. And just in closing, I want to kind of just reiterate what Lisa had said and Shari had said. This can be very overwhelming. Not only for an individual who is not a survivor or who is not experiencing abuse, and certainly for those who are. And my hope with this webinar is not only to bring awareness and not only to hopefully support AEquitas, but also to ask all of you, as Lisa did, to just step up during this time, step up during this pandemic, contact your community leaders. Don't be an investigator yourself. Call Childline if you have a suspicion of there are certain immunities for people who call and are wrong. Don't be that investigator if you're not trained, or you are trained but are not being able to, in the course of your training, being able to look in after those people. Make sure you are mindful. You would want someone to do that for you, for your loved one. Be mindful of those survivors. Be also mindful of anyone in this vulnerable population, elders, children, survivors, etc. And just try to check in on people, whether it's on Zoom, family members. You have a lot of grandparents out there who aren't receiving their normal visitation with their children and grandchildren. There's also a lot of grandparents out there who are aware that their child and grandchildren are in abusive homes. Like, be mindful of them and try to support and check in on them.
Thank you so much, Kristen. And I have a question for Shari, and then as she answers it, I'm gonna put back that slide with all of the resources. There are many, but these are some great resources that were pulled together by our panelists. So Shari, the question is, how can people get help or stay connected when they're quarantined with family members who are disbelieving of the assault or of the trauma that they have survived?
I mean, it's such a good question, and it breaks my heart to even hear it. What I would say, and it depends how old you are, but if you're 18 and above and you need to access support, the best thing to do is go online and look for resources. There are counseling agencies all over the area that are offering free counseling, virtual counseling. If you're concerned about your privacy, if you feel like you don't know where you would go to talk, one of the things that you could do is you could download an app so that you could actually have conversations with people without worrying that somebody's going to pick up your phone and read what you're writing. But definitely right now, this is the time when you really want to get online and look for those support services. And I know it's really hard to be in an environment where you feel disbelieved and where you don't feel heard. It's so triggering. So do what you can to stay connected, even if you need to develop codes or different types of ways to talk to people so that you can actually say how you're feeling without feeling like others are going to actually hear what you're saying. But please take care of yourself, and you are so welcome to reach out to me if you want more specific feedback.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shari. And Lisa, I have a question for you. And I know you touched on this a little bit, but maybe just going back about when you're a neighbor or family member outside of a house where we suspect abuse. Can you talk a little bit more about what can someone do in this situation?
Sure. Well, if you don't want to just pick up the phone and call Childline, which is what I would recommend first, if you suspect any sort of child abuse, just pick up the phone and call 1-800-932-0313. As Kristen said, you have protection if you happen to be wrong. No, it's anonymous, so it's not like someone's going to come knocking on your door and lock you up for you making a suspected report of abuse. And it turns out, thankfully, we would hope to be nothing. But if beyond that, as a neighbor, community member, family member, if you do suspect, there are things you can do. You can try to stay in touch with that child as much as possible. Like I said, there's FaceTime. There's different, like I said, you can organize community reading groups or group arts and crafts, anything to get your eyes on that child. You can also, if you're able to do this, come up with a word that the child can say to you that's sort of a triggering, almost like a safe word, for them to let you know that they're not okay. And even if they never use that word, the fact that they have it and they know that there is someone they can say that word to and it's going to trigger that person getting them help, that can go miles for a child that's in an at-risk situation. I mean, kids are sadly very resilient, and kids will figure out ways to survive even in the worst of circumstances. And sadly, I think a lot of that is going on right now. But if you are a neighbor who already sort of had your eye on a household, or you feel like something's wrong, definitely do everything you possibly can to stay in contact with that child and with that family. But the simplest thing you can do is just pick up the phone and make a report.
Thank you so much. Shari, I have another question for you. And you had talked about, I'm recalling you talked about before, describing how we're feeling during this pandemic. And I'm wondering, or the question is, what can you do to work with survivors who aren't ready to share in testimony what has happened with them? How do you work with them through that process, if getting them ready to share what has happened through testimony?
I'm so glad you're asking that, because I see so many people who are having dealt with something that happened to them. For some of them, it's been 5 or 10 years, and they struggle so much with, if I can't even tell my husband or my best friend, or if I'm afraid to sit and talk with you, how in the world would I ever report this? What I say to people is, and this is where the statute of limitations is so important, that we work on ending that. What I say to people is, you need to take care of yourself first. So you need to give yourself time to be able to know your story and tell your story. That's something that I do in therapy with people, is I'm the person that helps people to speak, to be able to own their story and understand the impact, and to know that you do not have to report something that happened to you if you do not feel ready. If you feel like, I don't think I would be able to keep myself safe, or I don't think I have adequate support. We start from where the person is. So you need to be respectful of that, and to know that you're not less of a person. It doesn't make you less brave if you say to yourself, I'm not ready to make that call. The most important thing that we can do as survivors is just be able to know and own our experience, and to be able to recognize how it affects us, and then to decide, as we go through the healing process, what can I do about this? What are my choices? Not everybody wants to report and go through litigation. There are some people who feel like, if I don't litigate, I would never be able to live with myself. So it depends on your situation. And just, again, know no matter how you move forward, if you're speaking, if you're knowing what happened to you, you're facing your trauma and you will reclaim your life no matter what you end up deciding to do after that.
That's so powerful. And I think in talking to you and getting ready for this, I was saying, wow, if I needed support, I would really love to have someone like you in my corner, all of you. So thank you so much for that. Kristen, this one's for you. If I have symptoms or test positive for COVID, what do I do about a case that I have?
So, and that's a really good question, because if the courts are open, or because they're going to be open at some point, and Corona is most likely still going to be around at that point as well. So if you have symptoms, or if you are feeling, or if you have tested positive, the most important thing to immediately do is to contact your attorney and let them know, so that they can best discuss with you the best way to handle the court proceeding. If you are not represented by an attorney, at that point, you should contact the clerk, or even the judge directly at that point. The reason I say the clerk is because with this virtual system in many jurisdictions, the actual presiding judge may not be the same person who's going to hear your matter. So you want to get to make sure that you speak to someone directly and right away. And generally there is a email address or phone number that you can reach the clerk if the judge's chambers numbers is not being answered or manned or even responded to. So you want to make sure that you contact the clerk, you let them know, and see if there's anything that the judge is requesting. The judge most likely will request a doctor's note or something from you. And if you didn't make it to the doctor, but you're experiencing symptoms, like if you don't have like an official notice saying, hey, I've tested positive, then those are some things you again want to discuss with the judge. And if not, then get on a telemedicine call with your physician if you're afraid to go into an urgent care or some type of facility, and make sure that you try to get something in writing that you actually went and saw a physician and have something, so that you don't get contempt of court, so you don't have some type of action made against you, and you don't lose your case based on being ill or being sick based on this virus. And the only thing I should have mentioned in the first part is just a little legal disclaimer. Definitely always contact your attorney. Don't rely on any of the things that I or anyone here said as legal advice, please.
Thank you, Kristen. And with that, I have another question for you, though. If my restraining order has been violated, what do I do now, if anything?
The most important thing you want to do is contact the police immediately. And that is really, 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 really important, especially if your life is in danger. Call 911 right away. The thing that I'm seeing from just individuals within the community who reach out to me for advice is that there's a lot of misinformation out there. Make sure that you hold, and that's why I love AEquitas, hold law enforcement, hold the courts, hold your attorneys accountable to making sure that that restraining order is not violated. The important thing to understand about that restraining order is that it is a court order. What that means is that it is a directive from the court ordering that abuser to stay away from you, don't contact you, whatever that order says. That is a court order, and people are supposed to abide by it. If that court's order is violated, the police need to be notified, and there needs to be some type of emergency hearing such that to hold that abuser or that person who has violated that court order in contempt, so that they are held accountable for violating that court's order. And specifically, like I said, if your life is in danger, you call 911 immediately, or your child's life is in danger, or anyone's life is in danger.
Thank you. And this question is for Lisa. How during the pandemic are we staying in touch? And I think it means child advocates, such as yourself or guardian ad litem, staying in touch with kids who are at risk, who are at foster care, or at different places, different placements. How are you doing that?
Well, with my older kids, they have access to me. They usually have their own cell phones. So they have access to me that way. I was actually texting with a child prior to the seminar. A lot of Zoom meetings. So I was on a Zoom meeting yesterday with a social worker with my young client who's 10. and I'm foster mom. So a lot of it's virtual. We're trying to utilize these tools to keep eyes on kids. Luckily, and this is why I always recommend to advocate, you know, it's listed in our duties. It's like the #1 duty. You're supposed to meet with your client and you're supposed to do it regularly. So if you were already doing that prior to all of this, then you have a pretty good idea of what the placement is like, who lives in that household, how the household operates. So for me personally, for my kids that are already in care, I feel very grateful because I know where they are, I know they're okay, and I do still have regular contact with them, just not in person. But as advocates, it's our job to know that they're okay where they are. And so you should be able to utilize technology to still stay in touch with your clients. And it's not ideal. We're supposed to be visiting their placements regularly, and we all wish we could do that. But if you were already doing your job before that, then you know that that placement is safe. You know that that child is safe and their needs are being met. And so then what we have to do is utilize the tools that we have right now, and, you know, make the phone call, do the FaceTime, have the Zoom progress meeting with the social worker so that everyone can see each other and see that the child's okay. That's the best we can do right now.
No, and I really appreciate you saying that, because I think that gives people a lot of comfort knowing that there aren't children on their own just because there's a pandemic. And this is why it's so important. If you have if you're involved in a case or know about a case and there is not a child advocacy center involved, or there's not one in your community, you really should push to get one. And Lisa is a great resource on developing child advocacy projects. She's in Montgomery County, of course, but I can speak as a prosecutor and as someone who is involved with the volunteer attorneys and social workers through those projects. It makes all the difference. And sometimes just the knowledge that there's someone checking in and watching a child can protect that child against their abuser from other harm. And certainly it's another set of eyes. So I really appreciate that. And we're coming up on the hour. We still have a couple of questions, but I thought I might just ask Shari to talk just a little bit about the book, which you are again so graciously agreeing to donate some proceeds of. But this is a wonderful book, and I wanted to be able to let people know about it.
Thank you so much. So the book is comprised of a bunch of different patient stories, people who have survived all different types of trauma. It's written for men and women. There are strategies at the end of each chapter so that you can figure out how to deal with whatever your issues are. I also offer a lot of tips for support people, family members. I wrote some in the book also about my own story and how being a part of the Cosby trial and being present at the trial helped me to go public with my own story. So there's a whole bunch of stuff in there, and it was really a dream come true for me to be able to sit down and write a book about people, thrivers, warriors, people who are in their 20s up till their 70s, finding ways to really live life fully, even after horrible things have happened to them.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing all of that. I think it oftentimes helps us if we know there's strength in numbers and you're not alone, to be able to go through something like this, and or to be able to just know how to support somebody. And again, remembering, I mean, from the research, the first person to whom someone discloses, the reaction of that person can set the course as to whether a survivor shuts down or whether they're able to seek help, engage the system, and to help recover. And so for those of us who are allies, it sounds like a great resource, and that's something we can do. It can feel so helpless sometimes. I mean, if we haven't been trained, like these incredible individuals on the call, on the panel today, but there are things we can do just by being there and knowing how to connect our survivors with resources. And I'm going to put those resources up right now. I have one final question. We are just over the 3, but just how do I know, Kristen, how do I know if my local courthouse is still open?
Well, the one thing you want to do is definitely call the clerk of courts. just to see if they're open. The other really useful website is the statewide, every state has its own little website that actually compiles everything together. Err on the side of caution that the court is open, particularly for emergency motions, or emergency matters, I should say. And one thing that you can always do is look, and there is always some type of phone number or email that you can email the prothonotary or the clerk, just to make sure, to see if your court hearing is still on, or to see even if the courthouse is open. Generally, I think, like I said, err on the side that the court is operational. I should have said this. Err on the side that the court is operational, but that the courthouse facility, the physical building, will be closed. And again, or limited access based on emergency matters only. And like I said, you can even contact your attorney or even contact me. I'm happy to kind of walk you through to see if the courthouse is open in your jurisdiction.
And thank you so much. I'm just putting up the contact information for our panelists. As we wind down, I just hope that when people were writing down the resources, they saw the middle resource, and you can contact Shari, obviously, to get it. This week we celebrated mental health awareness, and it's very important, again, as a survivor, as a supporter, ally, and just those of us just humans, to know that you're not alone. There are, in that Philly Mag article, is a great compilation of resources. Just because we can't meet face-to-face does not mean that we have to face any trauma or just working things out alone. And that was a great resource that's available. Also, I've included the information for our panelists today, and want to thank them again so much for sharing their expertise and knowledge. I know an hour is not a lot of time, but there were so many important pieces of information. And again, an informed community, informed survivors are empowered to help help protect all of us. And I think it's so important, and empowered to help hold the systems accountable that are responsible for keeping people safe, and accountability. I just want to ask the panelists as we close up, and again, we got to a lot of questions. If we did not get to yours, please reach out to our panelists, or if that information was done too quickly, you can, I'll just put it back up again for a second. If it was done too quickly, you can reach out to AEquitas, where you got your registration from. We're happy to put you in contact with them. And I just want to leave it to the panelists to close it out. We are over 3 o'clock, so I want to be mindful and respectful of your time. But we did have some questions, and so I just wanted to, thought I had one more I needed to sneak in, but we're okay. So just wanted to leave it up to you all to close us out.
I just want to tell people that we recorded the webinar. So even if you're on today and you feel like I really want to listen to this again, or if you have friends or your therapist or your attorney, if you know anybody that might really benefit from listening to the webinar, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We will be posting the webinar, and we would be happy to send you the link.
And I would just add, thank you so much for even participating in this webinar. Thank you so much for your insightful questions. And like I said, there are people out there, there are organizations out there that could really use a helping hand. So if you have it in you, I know these are really tough times for everyone, but if you have it in you, please consider donating. Even like I said, there's no amount too little, to either AEquitas or some organization that would be helpful to you. The way to donate to AEquitas is right up on your screen currently. And like I said, we do have matching partners. And if we meet a certain threshold, our partners will match that. And that can be a tremendous asset for our survivor community. So please, 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 if, like I said, there is no amount of money too small. If you have it, please think about and consider giving it either to AEquitas, or if you need a donation basket to even minimize any financial burden that could be on any other families that can result in some type of abuse. The only other thing I would like to just add is, like I said, Shari is willing to give signed copies of her book, her amazing, wonderful book. Not only will it be a tremendous asset for you if you're experiencing trauma, but certainly if you know someone who is experiencing trauma and want to gift it to them, now's the time to buy it, particularly since AEquitas is going to be able to benefit from it. And sustaining organizations like AEquitas is an extremely important thing, particularly during pandemics. Thank you so much for your time. And if you also know of any other matching partners who'd be willing to match our goal, definitely let us know.
Lisa, did you have any closing words?
I just wanted to thank everybody for participating today. I'm always happy to talk about kids and how we can help them, and to talk about advocates and how amazing they are. And again, I'm going to say it too, because AEquitas is a huge reason why prosecutors across this nation and law enforcement across this nation are able to bring these cases and get justice for children and for adults who survived trauma and sexual assault. So if you can donate, it's Mother's Day, I'm going to donate on behalf of my mom. That would be great. And just one last thing, that when you're out in your community, keep your eyes open, keep your ears open, trust your gut. If you feel like something's wrong, it probably is. And just pick up the phone. It's the simplest thing you can do, and it could literally save a child's life. So thanks, everybody.
Great way to end. That's a great way to end, because I think it makes us all feel like we can do something about it. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We hope you have a safe and well rest of your day and week. And thank you so much to our fantastic presenters. Please don't forget to reach out to them if you have any questions after this. And thank you all so much for your time.